Bibliophiles of the internet, today I'm here to bring you the hotly anticipated, highly requested part 2 to my mini-series about queer horror books. If you missed part 1, that video is an inventory of pretty much every single queer horror and or paranormal book I've ever read. That one functions as more of a straightforward recommendations video. In this part, I'm going to talk about the queer horror / dark fiction / paranormal books that I would still like to read. Again, I want to preface this by saying that this is not intended to be a definitive nor complete list. It absolutely never could be, so it's not. And because these are books I haven't read yet, there's a little asterisk in the sense that the queer aspects are to the best of my knowledge at this point. Okay, let's just get into it. We're starting off a little more niche with The Ghost of Buxton Manor by Jonathan L. Ferrara. This is a queer YA paranormal romance that I believe is based on the real-life inspiration for Peter Pan. It's about a 17-year-old ghost named Rupert who's been trapped haunting his childhood home for nearly a century, basically doing the same things over and over again and desperately trying to recall his former life. When a new family moves in, there's a teenage boy who might be the first person Rupert has been able to reveal himself to, and this boy might just be the key to help him uncover his mysterious past. This is a backlist indie published book that has weathered many TBR shelf purges on like Goodreads and stuff. Every time I look up the synopsis, it still captures me and I would still love to read it. Plus, I have a pretty good track record when it comes to queer ghosts. Next, we have The All-Consuming World by Cassandra Khaw. Cassandra Khaw is a non-binary author of sci-fi and horror predominantly, and in fact this story is in the realm of space horror. It's about a team of former criminals who get back together to try and solve the mystery of their last disastrous mission and hopefully rescue a missing crewmate. But there are highly evolved AI standing between them and this planet they're trying to get back to, and the AI are willing to do whatever it takes to keep humans from ever controlling the universe again. There's a lot about this story that speaks to me. I love a recon mission in space. I love that this ragtag crew are described as a band of dangerous women. There's some interplay with humanity and technology as well, because either some or all of these characters are half clone and half machine. I've heard really great things and I'm very much intrigued. Speaking of Cassandra Khaw, let's just talk about their latest release, which is The Salt Grows Heavy. This is a horror fantasy novella that's putting a dark twist on that classic story of a mermaid coming to shore and falling in love with a prince. But in this version of the tale, mermaids are vicious and violent, and the mermaid and her daughters have destroyed the kingdom and burned it to ashes. Now the mermaid is on the run, and she's joined by a mysterious non-binary plague doctor who has their own dark secrets. Traveling through the eerie, snow-crusted forest, the two of them stumble upon a village of ageless children who thirst for blood. Just with that, I know everything I need to know about this. Non-binary plague doctors, bloodthirsty mermaids, dark twist on a familiar fairy tale, characters embracing the cruelest parts of their nature if they hope to survive. Sign me up. Sign me up any day of the week. Going back to space horror, we have another TBR veteran, which is The Luminous Dead by Caitlin Starling. This, I believe, is a sapphic sci-fi thriller in space. The main character, Gyre, has conned her way onto this space expedition because she desperately needs the money to get herself off-planet and track down her missing mom. But in doing so, she got way more than she bargained for. She's working with a crewmate named M, who apparently controls Gyre's body with drugs, intentionally withholds information about this expedition, and knows all about her falsified credentials. So as Gyre descends into the depths of this mysterious planet, she's noticing a lot of inconsistencies, missing supplies, last-minute changes en route, and shifts in M's motivations. So not only is she helpless and powerless in this very dangerous terrain, but she also can't shake the feeling that someone or something is following them. Again, this one has stayed on my TBR for a reason. It sounds like a hell of a sci-fi thriller. I always hear it described as claustrophobic as well, which definitely makes my ears perk up a little bit. It sounds wild, and I think it stayed on my TBR for so long because I just have to know what happens. Speaking of doomed expeditions, I've also been wanting to read Into the Drowning Deep by Shauna McGuire, also known as Mira Grant. This is another horror fantasy kind of story about a sea vessel that set off on a voyage to the Mariana Trench, the deepest point on Earth, and their goal was to film a mockumentary centered around ancient, legendary sea creatures. That vessel was lost at sea without a trace, with no survivors, and it was so mysterious that there is some public opinion that the disappearance of this vessel was just an elaborate hoax. So now there's a new crew being assembled. Some of them are going on this mission to validate their life's work, some are seeking an epic hunt at sea, some are seeking the truth, but for one of those ambitious young scientists, Victoria, it's a voyage to uncover what really happened to the sister she lost. Listen, I know I need to read this. I know, and every time I see it pop up, I'm like, Damn, that sounds so good. And I know it's gonna be good. I have no excuses, no defense. I'm just having fun with these segues right now, but speaking of inexplicable things happening at sea, I would also like to read Our Wives Under the Sea by Julia Armfield. This is another sapphic sci-fi horror, perhaps bordering more on speculative fiction or literary fiction. It's about Leah, who is finally returning home to her wife after a deep-sea mission that ended in catastrophe. But it quickly becomes clear that the Leah that's returned home is not the same person. Whatever happened in that vessel, whatever these scientists were supposed to be studying when they were stranded on the ocean floor, Leah has brought it back with her and either knowingly or unknowingly unleashed it into their home. I've heard this one described as more of a slow boil, more of a strange things are happening as opposed to an outright creature feature or anything like that. For some reason, I'm just drawn to weird shit happening in the ocean, and this is another case of I just have to know what happens. You would think I don't have any more ocean-based horror to talk about, but I do. I also have to talk about The Gilded Abyss by Rebecca Thorne. This is another queer indie published book that came out this year, and I think it might actually be a horror romance. It's about a former soldier named Nyx who just wants to leave her haunted past buried deep in the ocean, right beside her dead best friend. But then Cassandra, a powerful royal and Nyx's ex, requests her help investigating a massacre that occurred down in the watery abyss. Despite her protestations, Nyx is assigned to be Cassandra's bodyguard and forced aboard the Luminosity, a luxurious submersible that's the only way in or out of this underwater city. But it turns out this investigation isn't actually about a massacre, but rather the root cause, a mysterious illness that incites its victims into a violent rage. The setup of this reminds me a lot of Deep Silence by S.A. Barnes, which is sci-fi horror but not queer horror, but it has that similar premise of being trapped in this fixed location where a mysterious massacre or tragedy took place and being in increasing danger the more you stay trapped in that place. It sounds really good, and I also love that there's a romance element. I'm a sucker for a good bodyguard romance, I have to admit, so this is definitely on my list. Let's go from one indie title to another with Wicked Little Things by Justin Arnold. This is a queer, witchy YA story about Dane, who's forced to return to his small hometown after his cousin is killed. That would be bad enough, but he's a witch with fiery powers he can't control, and he also thinks he's responsible for his cousin's death in the first place. Much to his surprise, almost immediately upon his return, he's claimed by this coven of fashion-forward mean girl witches, which is actually lucky for him because they have the necromantic powers he needs to figure out what actually happened to his cousin. I've wanted to read this one ever since it was announced, ever since the cover was revealed. It sounds part coming-of-age story, part romance, part mystery thriller, plus a queer teenage witch with fire powers just sounds badass. Very Wyatt from The Witch King. Next, y'all know I love a good haunted house story, and one of the highest ones on my reading list is Tell Me I'm Worthless by Alison Rumfitt. This is a queer horror story about a trans woman written by a trans woman. It's about Alice, who spent one night in an abandoned house with her friends 3 years ago, and since then her life has slowly but surely taken a downward plunge. Memories of that night torment her, but when her friend Isla asks her to return to the house, Alice knows she has to go, not only to face down the horrors of what she experienced there, but to try and rescue Hannah, who the house has chosen to make its own. I already said it, I love a good haunted house story, and trans horror is one of my favorite subgenres out there, and I've heard great things about this. While we're here, I should also talk about Alison's recent release, Brainworms. This looks like gross queer horror, and I'm so psyched about it. It's once again following a trans woman named Frankie, whose workplace is actually bombed in an act of transphobic violence, and Frankie is doing a horrendous job of coping with the aftermath of that carnage. Then she meets a mysterious and beautiful stranger named Vanya, and as their relationship grows and intensifies, so does Frankie's feeling that Vanya is hiding something from her. When Vanya's secrets threaten to destroy them, Frankie starts digging and discovers a sinister, depraved conspiracy that she never expected. Again, from what I've heard, this just sounds like it's gonna be gross and disturbing and weird, which are all buzzwords for me, strangely enough. I know my friend Sage started reading this shortly after it came out, and they posted a picture to their stories that said, "All you sick freaks are gonna love this," and it's me. I'm Sick Freaks. Switching back to a much lighter YA story, I would also love to read The Other Ones by Fran Hart. This is a queer paranormal YA story about Sal, who lives in a haunted house, and his life changes when a stranger, a fellow outcast named Pax, arrives on his doorstep. The two of them form an unlikely friendship, and Sal learns that Pax is drawn to all things creepy and strange, which is what led him to the house and its ghostly inhabitants. And as they grow closer, the true nature of these hauntings gradually comes to light. Again, this one is more of a paranormal romance. I've seen a lot of my queer friends review this one highly, and I do tend to enjoy ghost stories, again, if you know what I'm saying. Also, the listing for this book describes it as, quote, a cozy contemporary romance and ghost story with spooky Gilmore Girls vibes. Sold. We're making another sharp pivot into something much darker, namely Eyes, Guts, Throat, Bones by Moira Fowley Doyle. This is a collection of queer horror stories sort of interrogating what the end of the world might look like. It could be anything from an old man slowly turning into gold, to flowers raining down from the sky, to people wearing other people's faces, to good old-fashioned interdimensional summonings. Obviously, I haven't read this, so I don't have a great way to sum it up yet, but the description calls this a, quote, startling and irresistibly witty collection that explores all of our darkest impulses and deepest fears. Next, I have another book the queers have absolutely been loving, and that is Bitterthorn by Kat Dunn. This is a gothic, sapphic romantasy about a town overshadowed by an ancient curse. There's a sinister castle hidden deep in the woods, and in that castle lives a monstrous witch. Once a generation, she comes to town and claims a companion to return with her, a companion who will never be seen again. That time is drawing near again when the story starts, and our main character, Mina, daughter of the Duke, is chosen as the witch's next companion, and as she is stranded with her darkly alluring captor, the mystery of what happened to the previous companions draws Mina towards a terrifying secret that could either save her life or end it. This reminds me a lot of Uprooted by Naomi Novik, which you may or may not know is one of my favorite books. So I'm definitely interested to see that sort of premise with a dark sapphic twist. Also, something about this dark fairy tale type of story gives me T. Kingfisher vibes, and I'd love to see how that plays out. And while we're on the subject of becoming a monster's companion, I've also wanted to read A Dowry of Blood by S.T. Gibson for quite some time. This is a queer gothic vampire romance reimagining Dracula's first bride, Constanta, who's saved from the brink of death by a mysterious stranger and transformed from a peasant into a bride fit for an undying king. Constanta quickly realizes that her betrothed is capable of horrific things, and she eventually finds comfort in the arms of her rival consorts. Together, these women, these brides, begin to unravel their husband's dark secrets. I've had this book ever since it was first indie published. It's now been republished by a traditional publisher, which is awesome for S.T. Gibson, and I definitely still want to read it. I love a good retelling, especially when classics are reimagined through a queer lens, so I think I'm going to get along with this book famously. Again, we're pivoting genres, but next up is All the White Spaces by Ali Wilkes. This is kind of a historical survival thriller slash horror, if I remember correctly, set right after World War I, and again, if memory serves, we're following a trans man who stows away on an Antarctic expedition. But it's not this smooth sailing adventure he always hoped for, because not only is there a lot of war-related trauma among the crew, but disaster also strikes in the frozen sea, and the men have to take to land if they want to continue on. So they're navigating this frozen landscape with no ability to contact the outside world, and they're also being inexplicably drawn towards a place that's not marked on any of their maps. What's more, as night falls, they discover that something terrible is waiting to lure them out into the deadly landscape. I'm pretty sure I heard about this one from my friend Jessie at Jessie on YouTube. They have great taste. I trust their recommendations, especially when it comes to thrillers of any kind, and they definitely made me want to see what this one is all about. I guess we'll continue on talking about horror thrillers with Your Lonely Nights Are Over by Adam Sass. This is a recent release. It's a queer YA horror and slasher about two gay teenagers, Deary and Cole, who have these larger-than-life personalities and who are also known as troublemakers. But they're soon facing their biggest threat yet when a famous, never-caught serial killer emerges from retirement, and the clues seem to point back to our two main characters. This serial killer is also targeting the school's queer club, so Deary and Cole are willing to do whatever it takes to unmask the real killer so they can not only clear their names, but save the rest of their friends. I loved Adam's debut, Surrender Your Sons, which was not horror, but was definitely dark and gruesome and disturbing, so I know he can pull this off. And I'm also just really excited to eventually read the story about queer teens literally fighting back and saving themselves. Speaking of queer YA slashers, I've also been really intrigued with You're Not Supposed to Die Tonight by Kalynn Bayron. This is a queer summer camp slasher story about Charity, who works at Camp Mirror Lake, where the staff are recreating scenes from a classic slasher film as part of this elaborate full-contact terror game that they put on for guests. Charity is playing the role of the final girl this year, which she's really excited about, but on the last weekend of the season, her coworkers actually begin disappearing, and when one of them turns up dead, Charity's role as the final girl suddenly becomes a little bit too real. Listen, I love a good slasher, and this one sounds really interesting. I also like that there's elements of both theater and mystery mixed together in this. This one also piques my interest because Kalynn Bayron has mostly written queer fantasy up to this point, but I'm really excited to see what she does with this genre shift. Going from one terrible camp to another, I also have to talk about Camp Damascus by Chuck Tingle. This is Chuck's debut horror novel that has a very vague synopsis. It's set in Neverton, Montana, home to an extremely God-fearing community, and high up in the mountains is Camp Damascus, hailed as the most effective gay conversion camp in the country. But as the synopsis says, the secret behind their success is anything but holy. I'm so psyched about this one. The air of mystery makes me even more curious to get in there and see what's really going on with this terrible conversion camp. And I absolutely love stories that explore and deconstruct religious trauma, especially through a queer lens, and I'm really excited to see how this story does that. Also, this one might not be on my TBR for much longer, if you catch my drift. Pivoting back to sci-fi horror, we have The Seep by Shauna Porter. It's about a trans woman named Trina whose life is changed forever in the wake of a so-called gentle alien invasion by an alien entity calling itself The Seep. In the wake of this invasion, there seems to be the creation of a utopia where capitalism falls, hierarchies are dismantled, and anything that can be imagined is made possible with the introduction of this new alien tech. Trina and her wife Deba live peacefully in this new utopia for quite some time, until Deba begins to imagine what it would be like to be reborn as an infant, and she uses Seep tech to actually do it and vanishes from Trina's life. Heartbroken and in the midst of self-destructing, Trina encounters a young boy, and in an attempt to save him from the Seep, she embarks on an unexpected quest. In terms of horror, this seems much quieter, much more internal and psychological. I think it leans more towards dystopia and strange sci-fi, but I think especially with the elements of grief and the overwhelming power of this alien presence, it definitely has those darker aspects that really draw me to the story. Then we have a novella that I've been meaning to read since it came out in March, which is Feed Them Silence by Lee Mandello. Lee Mandello is the author of Summer Sons, an amazing queer Southern Gothic that I mentioned in part 1. This is a sci-fi horror novella where they dive into the minds of wolves. The story is about Dr. Sean Kell-Ludden, who uses a cutting-edge neurological interface to translate her animal subject's perception through her own mind, which allows her to make incredible scientific breakthroughs, but also allows her to live out her secret dream of experiencing wolfishness. But pursuing this research comes at a cost. Her obsessive ambition is endangering her relationship with her wife, the research methods are threatening her mind and her body, and she could also be risking the life of her precious wolf subject. Even though I'm not sure whether or not it follows a trans character, I think you can tell that this idea of changing and transmogrifying and experiencing life in a different form is coming from a trans lens, and I'm super interested in that perspective. Moving on to a book I've talked about before and remain excited for, and that is Beholder by Ryan LaSala. This is another recent release. It's a queer YA horror story about Ethan, whose grandmother has always warned him about his family's cursed ability to rewind the reflection in any mirror and peer into its recent past. But one night he's invited to this glamorous party and he breaks his grandmother's one rule when he goes to the bathroom and turns his reflection back just for a moment. But in that span of time, he hears a slam against the bathroom door and screaming. building, and when he tries to look outside, he's pushed back in by another boy who tells him not to open the door. There's more screaming, more imperceptible chaos, and when Ethan finally emerges, he discovers a massacre where the victims appear to have arranged themselves into a disturbingly elegant sculpture, and his mysterious savior is also nowhere to be found. I always say this, but Ryan's mind is absolutely incredible. All of their stories are truly unique, and even when you think you know where the story is going, they're able to twist it and take it to places that you would never expect. I'm not even going to go into this story with any expectations because I know with absolute certainty that my brain will be broken by the end. Next is another recent addition, and that is Bloom by Delilah S. Dawson. This is a grotesque novella about a sapphic romance that takes a deadly turn. We're following Rosemary, who meets Ash at the farmer's market selling these delightful artisanal goods. They quickly fall for each other, and Ro finds that she's never felt this kind of all-consuming desire for another person before, but as her obsession continues to grow, she finds that she may not actually be the one doing the consuming. My friend Xander actually told me about this book because they went to a local convention and Delilah was one of the authors there, and I guess they got to talking about this book, and she basically pitched it as, what if Hannibal was for the sapphics? Queer, cottagecore cannibals. I don't need to know anything else. I've also heard absolutely fantastic things about Chlorine by Jade Song. This is described as a blend of literary coming of age and dark, unsettling body horror. It's about Ren, who's an incredibly dedicated swimmer. Especially as a child of immigrants, she wants to put everything into this sport because if she gets scholarships and opportunities, then she'll be a success. But she also grew up on stories about creatures of the deep, especially mermaids, and she spends so much time in the water, so much time dreaming of the water, that she will do anything she can to become one with it and make the life she wants for herself, even if it means painfully transforming into a vicious mermaid. Again, there's been stellar reviews for this one across the board ever since it came out in March. It seems strange, it seems disturbing, and again, it seems like more of a slow-boiling story focused on body horror and the terrible reality that is becoming yourself. Going back to haunted houses real quick, I'm also really excited to get to A Haunting on the Hill by Elizabeth Hand. This came out very recently. It is the first ever authorized novel to officially return to Shirley Jackson's The Haunting of Hill House. This is a modern-day story about a struggling playwright named Holly who's finally gotten a grant to develop her play. So she decides that she needs to get away, she needs dedicated time and space to just get it done, and she finds this crumbling Gothic mansion hidden near a remote village. It sounds perfect to her, and even though her girlfriend isn't super excited about it, the two of them decide to rent out the house for a month, eventually bringing along a whole troupe of actors and creatives. But of course, as they try to settle in, the house's peculiarities begin to make themselves known, and soon Holly and her friends find themselves at odds not only with each other, but with the house itself. This is another case of I don't need to know anything else. And lastly, in terms of books that are already released, we have All That Consumes Us by Erica Waters. This is a paranormal dark academia YA story set in a university known as Corbin College, which has an elite academic society, Magna Viri, who have everything. Their tuition is free, they have the best professors, and they always get their dream jobs right after they graduate. So when Tara is offered a chance to enroll, she does not hesitate. But once she's settling into her luxurious Victorian dormitory, she starts noticing strange things. Her writing is going better than ever, but her stories are dark and disturbing and she doesn't recognize them. She's also having strange dreams at night and she feels like something is stalking her through the halls. Turns out there are some long-held secrets at the heart of Magna Viri, ones that might destroy her before she has a chance to escape. I love a good dark academia story, especially the kinds that grapple with the obsessive and destructive nature of ambition through a marginalized lens, so for me this one definitely has a lot of green flags. To finish out this video, I have just a few upcoming 2024 releases that are top of mind. Again, if you know of any more, please add them in the comments. First up is T. Kingfisher's follow-up to What Moves the Dead, which is What Feasts at Night. So we're once again following Alex Easton, who's a retired trans soldier, and after what happened at the Usher Manor, they're actually returning to their home country to visit the family hunting lodge. But when Easton arrives, they find that the caretaker is dead, the lodge is all but destroyed, and the grounds are blanketed by an unnatural silence. Nearby villagers say that a breath-stealing monster of folklore has taken up residence in Easton's home. Easton doesn't know what to believe, but they know without a doubt that something is not right. Super excited to have another horror story from T. Kingfisher. That's one of the places where she absolutely thrives. I love What Moves the Dead, so this follow-up cannot get into my eyeballs fast enough. Another early 2024 release that had a recent cover reveal was A Dark and Drowning Tide by Alison Saft. Alison Saft is an author of mostly Jewish-inspired YA fantasy, but this is her adult debut. From what I know, it's dark, it's gothic, and it's sapphic. This story also seems to be more fantasy-leaning. We're following Lorelei Caskell, who's a folklorist and aspiring naturalist, and she's part of this expedition alongside 6 eccentric nobles in search of a fabled spring, which the king wants to secure as his own. But things get off to a rocky start when Lorelei's beloved mentor is murdered on the ship, and the suspects are her 5 remaining expedition mates who all have their own possible motives. Now Lorelei is in charge of the mission herself, and she's working alongside her longtime academic rival to find the spring before the murderer can strike again. I love everything about this. It sounds like another doomed expedition type of story. It also seems to have some locked room murder mystery vibes with the murder that takes place on this ship. The synopsis also mentions a forest that rearranges itself at night, river dragons, and shape-shifting beasts. So on top of the academic rivals to lovers dynamic, I'm very much sold. And lastly, for now, we return to a tried and true author for me with The Woods All Black by Lee Mandello. This novella is pitched as historical horror, trans romance, and blood-soaked revenge set against the backdrop of 1920s Appalachia. It's about a trans nurse named Leslie Brune who's assigned to the backwoods township of Spar Creek. Having been through war and transition himself, Leslie thinks he can handle anything he comes across, but something ugly is festering in Spar Creek. The local congregation is relentlessly targeting a young person they insist is an unruly tomboy who must be brought to heel, and when Leslie arrives, they're already on the brink of violence. So Leslie knows that he has to act fast if he wants to help this young person. However, the hills enfolding Spar Creek have a mind of their own, and the woods are haunted in ways that Leslie does not yet understand. I've already said it, but I love queer horror stories that grapple with religious trauma of any kind, which this definitely seems like it does. And I just love how this novella is described as, quote, an Appalachian period piece that explores reproductive justice and bodily autonomy, the terrors of small-town religiosity, and the necessity of fighting tooth and claw to live as who you truly are. Everything about that sounds perfect. I'm assuming this is once again a pretty long video. I don't know how to do anything by half measures, and I won't apologize. But those are all, or at least most, of the queer, horror, paranormal, or dark fiction books that I would like to read. Hopefully it helps you discover a few new things yourself, and of course, feel free to drop your own recommendations down below in the comments. But that's everything I had to share for today. Thank you so much for watching, and until next time, educate yourself, be kind to yourself, take care of yourself, and I will catch you on the flip side of the page. Bye!